We'll let you keep chatting in just a second. Let's sit. If you're feeling far away, come over, forward if you'd like. Okay. Do I have your attention? Raise your hand. Go. Yes. Great. Yes, exactly. Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm excited to see that you're keen on chatting to each other and finding out who is in the room. You already know the first row of people here. So perhaps before we pose questions to them, I'd like to hear from you first. What sort of things emerged? Who is in the room? So perhaps just quickly, popcorn style, share a question that surfaced, a word that you're thinking of, something. Okay, so I see one hand over here, and your name?
Yeah, my name is Liz, and we were just speaking about the Indigenous, the situation for the Indigenous people here, and that was seemed to be articulated in any of the presentations, even in our youth climate lab, and I'm sure you've included Indigenous youth, right? And I'm sure, like, probably that project that was up on the map, probably grade slave late or something like this, for the Indigenous community, that it wasn't articulated anywhere in here, and we know that we might go around the world, as we were talking about, really great feminists around the world, great reputation, but at home, missing and murdered Indigenous women, no clean water, less spending on education, because that's what our focus is tonight, unequal, fighting the court battle to keep unequal funding for Indigenous education instead of funding at the same level that non-Indigenous children experience. So I just wondered if you could address that, because to me it's glaring. We have to do our work here at home and be responsible to our treaties and the human rights situation here at home.
For sure. I'll let that percolate, perhaps. Yeah. And hear two more comments. Yeah.
We need to get millennials to vote. And it's not just vote, but get out there, volunteer in communities, and get to know like people's lived experience.
Yeah. And your name?
Ingrid.
Thank you, Ingrid. Yeah.
And a quick fun fact, millennials just surpass, we're the biggest voting bloc in Canada for the next election over baby boomers, but we're disengaged. So it needs to come up, and yeah, we need to mobilize and start calling out. And if you know someone, talk to them and get them out to vote. Because in numbers, we're there. It's just engagement.
So who's the biggest voting bloc?
Millennials just surpass baby boomers.
Yeah. One more comment or question? Word? Shout it out if you will, at the back. Yeah.
Goodness.
Goodness.
I think you have to have some kind of goodness in who people are. Like, I had a brain hemorrhage in 7th grade, but I was an honors student before I had it. I always try to find goodness in things. I really do.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, so we have a few questions or comments. Perhaps we can pull the thread. Do our speakers have any questions for the room? Let's flip it. No?
Did you learn anything new?
Yeah.
Okay, so who would like to tackle Lynn's question on Indigenous communities and our role here?
I can start a little bit, and I thank you for calling us out on that. I recognize that, yeah, we didn't speak about it, while we did touch a lot on it during our 2030 project. Basically going out of the premise that you're entirely correct, and Canada prides itself to being above or meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. We're good at indicators, we're almost there, but when you actually do a disaggregate analysis and look at population, Indigenous communities are below and not meeting at all the Sustainable Development Goals. So before we go out and try and portray what we should be doing and what other developing countries should be doing, we need to take a good look inside and recognize that that's an issue in our own backyard.
You gotta change it though, too.
Yeah, you gotta change it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, we often, when we're talking about international development issues, this idea of, well, what about here at home? And one of the things that I really like about the framing of the Sustainable Development Goals, for those of you who aren't necessarily from this space or haven't spent a lot of time staring at them, you may not know that they build on something that we call the Millennium Development Goals, but what separates the SDGs from the MDGs is that it applies very much in a global lens. It's this idea that we are all an interconnected planet, and the goals that we set for all of us, no matter where we are in the world. We just have different places to go. So Canada's commitment to the SDGs is a commitment. So yeah, so these SDGs is the Sustainable Development Goals. That's what's taking us from 2015 to 2030. That's telling us where we want to work together to be in the next 10 years. So these are the goals and principles that as a sector our organizations have bought into, but our government, when it's articulating its policies, is saying, we want to hold ourselves accountable to the Sustainable Development Goals. But as Anna just shared, we know that those apply as much here globally as internationally. And I don't know so much that it's a language of before we tackle issues at home or tackle issues abroad, because this is an interconnected world. Rather than moving into that rhetoric of us versus them, I think it's really important to force ourselves to take a holistic approach, a global approach that says that we are all in this together, and it's not an either or, it's a yes and. In my comments, looking at the issue of intersectionality, this is where it becomes so key, absolutely, is to recognize that the experiences of somebody who identifies as Canadian does not speak for every Canadian. And so how are we understanding the unique needs and vulnerabilities of all Canadians, certainly also including Indigenous communities? Did you want to add to that? I'll just drop this mic then.
I'll just very quickly add one of our key recommendations in the Insights report, not just from the 2 events that I talked about, but the other six in total that we ran, was around reconciliation and how that is a fundamental need before we can. And yeah, I agree, it's a yes and, but as a principle and a starting point for Canadian implementation on the national strategy.
And I know that the exercise was sort of a focus on the global gaps as it relates to the need to draw down where are the key kind of gaps in which we can make the highest impact, and those were the 3. And obviously in these 3 kind of buckets, these are the 3 areas in which there's the greatest gap, and that's where it lends the focus to outside of Canada. But to your point, very much a key issue, very much a key gap here, very much something that we need to centralize in our conversations with our governments. And just to flag that, UNICEF Canada works in domestic policy as well. Indigenous issues are core to the conversation that we have with our decision makers. And so when we talk about Vote for Every Child, we're talking about children in our northern communities, children that don't get access to water, children that are left behind by our systems, that are in continuous cycles of poverty. Those are the children that we talk about when UNICEF Canada does its work in Canada. So to make a plug, when we're talking about Vote for Every Child, we're talking about those kids as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perhaps somebody could talk to the sort of the intersection, because in the Drawdown book there's a solution called Indigenous Peoples Land Management, and so there may be an intersection between the rights of women and the issues around Indigenous people and land management, which is actually one of the solutions in the book. So there may be explorations for that intersection as well.
I think maybe there might be somebody else in the room who could speak to this more eloquently than I. But one thing that came to my mind when we were listening to the TED Talk, and I really appreciated that she called out kind of the history of the environmental movement a little bit for its misogynistic and racist approaches. So too, I think we need to acknowledge the colonialist rhetoric that has often been present in environmental conversations about moral superiority, who has access to what land, ideas around farming, hunting, access to national resources. There is a really strong there's a lot of work around decolonization of that language and environmental sustainability work that has to happen. I am in no way an expert on that. I'd love to know if there's people here who are, because I think that that is a resource that certainly many of the organizations that CanWaCH works with would love to, I know are very interested in learning more about that and strengthening their capacity. So it's definitely, I think, I was glad to hear it acknowledged, but I think it links strongly to this idea of land rights and ownership and how we can bring those things together.
Does anyone in the room work in that intersection or have something to add? Okay, but thank you. That's a fantastic, consideration. Yes. Anyone else? Sorry, might not be able to see you. With questions, comments, perhaps you're keen to share what you do, share a solution you have and have been working on in your work. Yes, sorry, just at the back.
Okay, I like the second and the third people. You're the data people. And I was, before I had my hurt, I was very much an organized human being. I just felt so happy hearing you speak. It was just so good.
What a lovely thing to say.
No, you're really.
I don't know if you're talking about me, but thank you. What a lovely thing to say. No, data is cool.
Oh, I know that.
I would highly encourage you to go into the CanWaCH website and explore the wealth of resources that they're sharing with the sector and with everyone, with Canadians, and use that data. I'm sure you can find, fun ways, important ways, all sorts of ways to advocate with that data that's already there, that's already being compiled, and it's very comprehensive. What's out there, it's really job well done to CanWaCH and Jessica and her team. Anyone else? I'm sure you discussed something. Yes, your name?
Hi. Sorry if this has been discussed because I was in and out of the room. But I was wondering, how do you address the sort of the cultural barriers to, how do you change men's minds towards I mean, the men in the room here are enlightened, that's why they're here. But of course, there are a lot of men out there who don't believe in women's capacity. So how do you address that? And what do you do?
The most keen right now.
I think you talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think in general, when you have a conversation between two minds or minds that have different perspectives, the best way to find the shortest distance between those 2 points is common ground. And often when we the Uganda project, for instance, with the menstrual hygiene, with the health groups and the boys and girls, they're making the menstrual hygiene pads. And I use this, there's lots of examples, but this one's the most funny for me, because for me, if I think about being in grade 7 again, and being in health class, community and personal planning that we had, I'm from British Columbia, and sitting there with the boys in my class, going, collecting items to make pads, and how embarrassing that would be for me, and how uncomfortable. And yet in this space, the girls were getting goofy and the boys were getting goofy, and they were fastening other things to it and bejeweling it and whatever, and not very useful, but the process of doing this together on some sort of common ground and their vulnerabilities down and a common space, it made them see each other as equal and as the same, and as having similar kind of fears and things, that stresses and anxieties. And when you find that common ground, you can communicate information in a way that resonates with a perspective that may not have seen it in that way. It's the same thing with when I worked in Swaziland. Eswatini now, renamed a year ago, 2 years ago. There was a lot of, we would have men and men groups, having men talk to men, or we would go to the thought leaders in communities, church leaders, religious leaders, pop icons, pop influencers, and finding the things that are common grounds between people that they can relate to, and it just shifted in a way they'd never seen it before. And there's no easy answer. It doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it takes forever. Systems don't change overnight. ideologies don't change overnight, but what can change is when you start seeing the person that you have a different perspective with in the same light, or you can find areas that you resonate with them, and you're more amenable to their perspective. Short, long answer.
I can just quickly add, I think we need to stop seeing it as a net sum zero. Me gaining more rights doesn't mean that men are losing theirs. It just means that we're all being better off. So kind of changing the narrative, changing the conversation around, yeah, this is all winning and we're all going to be better off. If someone is threatened by that, then maybe their position is not well deserved. Like, I think it's just opening up the space and recognizing that, yeah, it's not a net sum zero game.
Maybe the only thing I would say is maybe echoing a point that was made earlier, which is I think the greatest way we actually change that is we get more women and gender diverse people into decision-making roles. I know we always want to look at how do we engage everybody here who's here right now, but I think actually the way that we truly move the dial, this is me speaking for me, is by changing the future, by putting more women in those decision-making roles, putting more gender diverse people in those roles, and changing it for the next generation who will see it as an obvious way of being and not something to be discussed in the way that we discuss it now.
Are there comments or questions? Sorry, I'm just looking at the time and we're running out. First, how are our speakers? Good? Good. Okay, all right, so maybe we can take 2 if that's okay with everyone else, or not so much? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm gonna take 3, because I saw 1, 2, 3 hands, if that's okay?
You can take them all at once.
Okay, great. Thanks for bearing with us. I'm glad that people are getting excited. One over there.
I just wanted to make a comment in response to getting women involved in decision-making and power roles. You have to join a political party first. That's the way our system works. And, once you join, you go through a nomination process and you have to gain the respect and the support of the people in your political party. And then you have to run. So it's not easy, but that's the first step. So, it's not just about voting. It's about joining a political party of your choice and then making sure that you move forward within that.
Your name?
Liz Couture from Drawdown, Richmond Hill.
Wonderful. Liz, anyone here in this room, and this is the people that should be in spaces of power and taking over and running, go talk to Liz. Please connect, because we need that confidence, right? We need to know what are the steps, how do we get there, because we need to, right? So please, hopefully you're good with that. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, here.
My name is Marla. One of the things I found fascinating that I didn't know about was about the commitment that the Prime Minister made of the $1.4 billion per year for 10 years for women's education. What was it for exactly?
It's called the Thrive Agenda, and it's a comprehensive approach to health and gender equality.
Okay, so that money, who has access to that money? Is that organizations that then seek out the money, or the government decides where to put that money? Do you have any idea?
Those details haven't been released yet,
okay.
And I would very much encourage people who are interested in knowing more about that. Many organizations are involved actively in this. We are one of many, but if you go on to CanWaCH's website, we can link you in for more details on that as it gets announced, but I would also just encourage you to follow the Government of Canada, Global Affairs Canada announcements on that, because right now there aren't full details. It's a 10-year commitment, so a lot of things are going to be full, but some details are available, and we can talk a bit more about that.
Thank you.
The Canadian Council for International Cooperation, CCIC, actually just, and a few other partners, just hosted a webinar on what that is, the Thrive Agenda. So perhaps if you go onto CanWaCH's website or CCIC's website, you will find a little bit more information, and just, Google these things. I'm sure they'll
but there's a full webinar on it, that was just recorded today.
Okay.
We can send that to you.
Great,
exactly.
thank you.
Yeah. Comments at the back? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just you first. Yeah.
So I wanted to thank the participants and for all the information that they have shared. I'm really happy that we were able to talk about the feminist international assistance policy and anything around the gender and climate action intersectionality. I wanted to just add to it, we perhaps you may have not heard the notion of climate justice and how it relates to intergenerational action also. And sorry, I'm moving a little out of all over the place, but my point is I wanted to add that Africa is the most vulnerable to climate change, and when it comes to this, yes, a major focus for climate action is in Africa because women are the most vulnerable, and Africa is the most vulnerable to climate impacts. And to that, I wanted to add that it's important to look at the context and that all different places that are benefiting from these type of interventions, some places historically or socially may have different power structures. I'm currently working on a project called Congo Sanctuary and Development. It's a female-led project from a woman who's Canadian but from Congolese, who's also Congolese, and is a descendant of the matriarchal system in Congo, from an indigenous system. And she is leading a project to support the community living on land, because she's a landowner with her family. And just to say that from that matriarchal system, going back to the land use and the natural resource management, that there are structures where women have an important role, and that it's important to support initiatives like these where women are in a position of leadership to influence the protection of nature and to provide livelihoods, especially because we have to stress the importance not only on basic needs as UNICEF Canada and all touching on reproductive health is an important section, but also employment and livelihoods are very important for people to understand the complexities of what we're dealing with, at least abroad in Africa. So just wanted to mention these and say more about it.
Thanks for that. I'm going to close the comments and questions right now. So sorry, we can chat later. But I'm just mindful of time. Yeah, your time and the speaker's time as well. So sorry about that. You can react to that, any of that if you'd like, but I'll also encourage you to say closing comments in that too. Okay?
Can I offer a question for closing comments? That you can answer if you like it. What, in your opinion, what is the one most important thing that can be done related to gender equality to address global warming? So,
Just be one.
Just one thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's one thing, but I have lots of arguments online with people all the time, and yeah, it's dangerous, and I don't know how productive it is, but I feel like I don't know what to say. We talk a lot about doing things, and then we don't do them. People are suffering. There's injustice, and yet we're not in the streets. We're not partnering with them in their protests, in their rallies. We're not giving up our time. As a white woman, I'm not giving up my privilege and my status. And I think we have to go beyond just saying that we're upset about things. And I'm saying that as myself. I talk online all the time about how upset I am and how, ooh, this is really grinding my gears. And yet I'm still sitting at home. And I'm not out there, and I'm not alongside young people. I'm not in the streets with marginalized folks. I'm not, there in remorse with their struggle. And I think it's now the time, and it's now the time to go beyond just saying that this is upsetting. Use your time, use your voice, use your space, use your privilege, and use it as a currency to make things happen beyond just saying that you want to make things happen.
Yeah.
being the contrary person that I am, will reject the idea that there is the single most important thing you do, because I think what that does is it reinforces this idea that there's a single story or a single pathway, and I have it and you don't unless you get on my pathway, and then you will also be doing the single most important thing. There isn't a one single all-knowing story. There are many stories. I'm here to tell one, which is to talk about the role of sexual and reproductive health and rights, but there are many different pathways up this mountain. But maybe related to those comments and also to the comment that was made earlier about the importance of joining a political party, yes, we have a society that is made up of elected officials and people who vote, but those are not the only two roles that you can play. And I personally believe that there are many ways to be powerful, many ways to make change that do not involve participating as an elected official in a political process. Not to say that that is a bad thing, but there are many other ways of being powerful and of making change, and a lot of times our political leaders follow the work of grassroots movements of amazing activists looking at the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And the data work that was done by those communities is an inspiring story of what people are able to do that leads to meaningful political change. That shouldn't be the way it has to happen in that case. But the point is there are many ways to make change. So I encourage folks not to see themselves in that binary. Well, I don't want to run for political office. I certainly don't. I don't think anyone would vote for me. But you say that now. But more to the point, I can also be more than just a voter for somebody else who does that. There are other ways that I can mobilize. This is how I use my voice and my power and my privilege. I encourage you to think of yourself not only as a voter, because that's important, but as somebody else who makes change and steps into the power and the privilege that they have, because we have them in intersecting ways. Yes.
Two tough acts to follow. I agree with both. I'll just kind of follow up and yeah, again, echo both of those answers, but say find what moves you. This is no longer an environmentalist challenge, it's an everyone's challenge. So find what you're passionate about, find what makes you wake up and be excited, and see how that associates to human rights, gender, sustainability. They're all interconnected. We saw it today. So it's not about joining someone's movement, but what's your own movement, and how can you make the best out of your passion?
Thank you very much. So just to close and to see you. Sure. Okay. I just want to see where are you at now with the gestures. Yes. Yes. Great. I'm glad. So just to say thank you to Anna, Jessica, and Kristiana, Natalie for leading us through a wonderful night. I'm going to pass it on to Natalie to just close us off, and you can all go home.
Thank you again to all of you. And I'll have more thank yous in a minute, but first a couple of announcements. So drawdowntoronto.ca is our new website, and we also have the unifytoronto.ca website. If you go there in the next little while, you should be able to find a video of this evening which you can pass on to friends. Andre was here making a shorter 2-3 minute video that you can use to spread the word. We'll have Jay's drawings up there as well. Our next event is an introduction to Project Drawdown on July 27th. And stay tuned for some bubbling up events. We're not sure exactly what shape they're going to take, but we're going to do some kind of all-sector summit in September, probably the week from 20th to 27th of September, which leads to the global Earth strike. So stay tuned. Lynn has an announcement, briefly please.
Thank you. The Youth Climate Strike last event of the year is tomorrow at 12:30. It's a meditation at Queen's Park. Everyone's invited to come out and support the youth. And then the next one will be the September 27th climate strike. Also, if you're interested in leading up to the election and getting involved in an interesting project called Kitchen Table Conversations, how can we engage people outside the environmental circle? We just did a training last Saturday here, and we will be doing more. And so I'll leave a page out there about it if you know, or talk to me if you're interested.
Thank you.
What organization is?
That's Climate Fast.
Okay.
ClimateFast.ca, Kitchen Table Conversations is the page, but you can see it.
You're welcome, once we close in a moment, to mill and help us stack chairs and talk and mill some more and eat, buy books. And Liz has an announcement about some cool bags for sale.
Yes, Drawdown Richmond Hill recently held a waste-free living seminar, and we work with various groups within Richmond Hill. One of them is called Targeting Climate Change, and so we have some cloth bags for sale for $4, and this helps our efforts, but it also helps us get the message out that, okay, it's a cloth bag, but the reason we have these cloth bags is it's going to help climate change. So please come by and take a look. Thank you.
Great. And one more piece is we are inviting you all to participate in Drawdown Toronto. There are a number of members of the core team and people who've been involved in past events who are in this room and have helped make today possible. And this has really grown from the vision of 2 people a year and a half ago, and people just coming and popping up at the events and taking leadership roles. So that includes you. There's a form outside called Invitation to Participate. You can fill it out and leave it with us as a way of signaling what you might be interested in. And I have some more thank yous because there are the people that you've seen in front of the room, but there are a lot of people behind the scenes. This was really a collective effort. I want to thank, let's see, Mia Astudillo. Yeah, really helped in coordinating and keeping the whole process going and bringing all the pieces together. John Love and Satya Robinson, they're the papa and mama of Drawdown Toronto and of Unify Toronto. They're in Germany and California, or California and Germany respectively, but they really helped a lot in shaping this evening. Charlene Day brought the Drawdown books and helped set up the group. Julie Saunders brought some refreshments for us. Thank you, Julie. Karina Dadibayeva, Karina did the live stream, yay! And Mia and Paul and Charlene at the welcome and registration table. I think that's it.
And
yes.
you.
Yes. And so now we have a tradition of a cheer. Have you heard, well, you've probably heard people saying, climate change means it's game over for the planet, it's game over for the human population. And Paul Hawken has come and said, no, we have the solutions. We have mapped them, we have measured them, we have modeled them. We know we can achieve drawdown by 2050, it can be done, so it's not game over, it's game on. So game on is our motto, and John and Satya developed this cheer. And so I'm going to demonstrate it, and then if you feel to, it's optional like everything in life. You can stand up and do the cheer with me the second time around. So here's how it goes. You start with your eyes closed, and breathe in hope, and breathe out hope. Breathe in possibility into your heart, and breathe possibility out into the world. And then make a fist, have a smile, and game on! Game on! Okay, so now that was the demonstration. So now you can stand up and do it with me. Okay. So hands on your heart. Breathing, eyes closed if you like, breathing hope into your heart. And breathing out hope into the world. Breathing, opening your eyes, breathing possibility into your heart. And breathing possibility out into the world. Making a fist.